take part in so see him around. We brought him all the way from one of the things we've been doing our culture, and every time we turn on the forum, we'd have this language and stuff. When I left Arizona, I started thinking, I go, we talk about it, we can do it. So we decided from now on, anytime we do a forum or any type of we're gonna bring our immersion classes and have them show you that we're with that, and if everybody can come up,
Yeah, and most of all, like I said, we don't the things that one of the things that we hold very highly in our culture, and that's our veterans. And us as people, when our veterans come in, we usually sing them an honor song. So that's why I call my brother up here, and I usually get him in a lot of trouble because I make him do things at the last second, because that's what NARF is good for, the last second. So I'd like him to sing an honor song for our veterans. I had a head, hey, kovicho kanke otejielo hey liamo la kovicho kanke otejielo hey And what we're doing as our children, we call our children. So when they reach out,
You know, for these kids are doing this is really important because it's going to show everyone here and everyone who's also but we are moving forward for these little guys that letting the world know we still are and they understand the I'm actually trying to think of an appropriate one.
Oh gosh, pela we chose on it, Maya Kuja, Pela Maya, Pela Maya,
Well, if you like to our veterans, the warriors, so I hope you know, thank you very much. If I can get Larry and Brian to come up, children come here today and get started. My name's Larry Seaman, and I'm the executive director of the Coalition of Large Tribes. I want to, first of all, thank the Potawatomi tribe for welcoming us here into their land and also this great facility. They've been more than kind to us. I don't know if any of you know me, but I'm very unorganized, and so when they get 3 calls a day changing things, they didn't hang up on me. They just helped me out. So with that, I'd like to call Brian up and have him introduce himself.
Buju, Ketchigam and Nini, Ninja Cosmos, Quabikong, and Dunjaba, Migasin and Dodem. Good morning, everybody. My name is Brian Bainbridge. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Great Lakes Intertribal Council. And what Great Lakes Intertribal Council is a consortium of tribes, especially the particular to where we're sitting here now, the 11 sovereign nations of Wisconsin and 1 sovereign nation of Michigan make up our governing board. And, you know, I got to thank Forest County Potawatomi, you know, our Getchada, our veterans, Dobunujiwag, Kwezensunk, Kwezesunk, Kwewag, Aniniwag, Aminamuyewag, and Wakawenziwag, you know, all the way from our babies to our to our elders, to the ones that walk the earth and really give us direction and fought for us to be able to do the things we do and to even be recognized. You know, this is a unique time of year, you know, as we see all the commercials and we're here and wondering why and trying to navigate these systems as we're getting ready and trying to get people ready to be prepared to vote. And, you know, it's important that we do this in Miigwechta, OJ, in 4 directions for hosting these types of events. And, you know, I think about through the years of my roles in leadership you know, I sit in that category with executive director, right, as a recovering tribal chairman, and having to be in Washington, D.C. and navigate through those systems. And, you know, one thing I always tried to do is not see that color of blue and red, because, you know, no matter what we do and who's there in whatever positions, we have to advocate for our people. And we try to put the best people in place as we can, you know, based off facts, based off our initiatives, based off our history, based off our families, our babies. And the way we do that is to be informed and to make sure that we're at the table as we move through this process. The bad thing with me, you get a mic in front of me, I'll go on forever. But yeah, I know we're running a little behind schedule, but you know, I just wanted to welcome on behalf of Great Lakes Intertribal Council and say miigwech to everybody for showing up, and you look forward to the weekend. And you know, our distinguished leaders that we have here, and to really get down and dirty. You know, that's what we need to do sometimes, and ask those tough questions and really find out what the position is. So, you know, on November 6th, that we're not lost as Indigenous people, and we're on the radar. So to be present, to encourage people to do what they hold the right to do, is to cast that vote and trying to bring us in a good place and for our future of our kids. So miigwech mio.
Larry?
Ho, Ponkamashe, Lashmaho, Dewa Noche, Larry Wright Jr. Ijajikte Abdi, Wishti, Usni Ponkabli. Good morning, everybody. My name is Larry Wright Jr. I'm the Executive Director for the National Congress of American Indians. As Brian said, I'm also a recovering tribal chairman for the Ponca tribe in Nebraska. And I want to recognize the other tribal chairmen that are here today, other tribal leaders, members of administration, Chief Malerba, Assistant Secretary Newland. Always good to see you both. And it's an honor to be here and represent National Congress of American Indians on behalf of Indian country and the work that has been laid out for us for 80 years. We know that the National Congress was founded on protecting tribal sovereignty in all areas where it's under attack. And we know today, more than ever, those attacks have increased and have become more sophisticated. And it takes all of Indian country for us to continue to push back and advocate and defend the sovereignty rights that we have as Indian people. And one of the strongest tools that we have today, and one of the reasons we're here today and have supported this event through NCAI, is the power of the vote. And I continue, when I was also a high school government teacher, and I use this quote when in talking to students at that time, and you know, bad officials get elected by good people who don't vote. And we know what the strength of Indian country has when it comes to voting. We have 3.7 million natives in this country that are eligible to vote, but only 1.2 million have actually registered to vote. And we need to make sure that we are advocating for candidates that run for office, that make decisions for our people and affect our people, from the local, state, and the national level, and all of them make a difference. And that is one of the strongest things that we can do as we advocate for, and NCI continues to push for a sovereignty ticket, making sure that anybody that's running for office, that our people know that the first question should be, if they support the U.S. Constitution, that means they support our tribal rights as well. And we need to make sure, as Brian alluded to, we're not voting D or R, we're voting I for Indian. And we need to make sure that whatever candidate, regardless of party, and we need both parties more than ever to be supportive of issues that face Indian country. And we need to make sure that our people, when they vote, however they vote, they're voting for candidates that will support tribal sovereignty and those laws that affect our people the most. And so it's an honor to be able to be the executive director for National Congress, to be able to support events like this. And we're real happy in the direction that we're going through our new foundation. We've been able to put out several hundred thousands of dollars in micro grants to help get out the vote efforts across Indian country. And that number continues to grow. And so we're very excited to continue this work, to be supportive of Indian country, but also to remind us all that the strength that we have in Indian country is the strength in our numbers. And we want to make sure that we continue for the next 80 years of NCI to advocate on behalf of our people for the sovereignty issues that we all face, and for those young ones that were here this morning. And again, thank you for allowing me to be here, OJ, and the work that you're doing, and everybody that took time to be here. I say, Wiblahan to the Heloshka, fellow warriors, veterans. Thank you for your efforts as well. Gatego, Wiblahan, Sheno.
I forgot to warn you, there's a ponca in the house, so if you have horses, make sure they're locked up. We have a very interesting agenda today. Before we start, and I invite Mr. Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs Newland up, I'd like to do some introductions. We will start out with Chairman Renville. Could you please stand up? And Chairman Renville is with Assistant Wapton Oyate from South Dakota. And Vice President Whitepipe, can you stand up, please? And Vice President Whitepipe is the treasurer of Colt and Vice President of the Rosewood Sioux Tribe. This election, we actually were able to elect 2 women as the president and vice president of the tribe, so history was made. And then Tracy Ching King, he is the vice chair of the Coalition of Large Tribes. And Mr. LeBeau owes me because I was going to introduce him first, but I saw that. Mr. LeBeau is the, stand up please, Mr. LeBeau is the chairman of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe in South Dakota. So thank every one of you tribal leaders for attending. With that, I want to call up Honorable Brian Newland, the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs. And you know what? I've been through quite a few administrations. I've never seen so much positive changes. And a lot has to do with our next speaker here, of the roadmaps that they have given us to improve our tribal lands and our people. So with that, Mr. Newman.
Miigwech, OJ, thank you. All right. Ani Buju, good morning, everyone. Minogijip, Minogijigad. I want to first say, Miigwech, thank you to Colt and 4 Directions for having me here today, for Glitzy, Forest County Potawatomi for hosting, as well as those who offered our prayers and songs this morning. I'm very grateful for that. And I'm really grateful to be back home in the Great Lakes area. This is Milwaukee's where my grandma grew up. She was the lone Packers fan in our family, and she was a really good trash talker about football. She always knew how to just get you right where it where it would make you mad, but not too mad. So I'm really glad to be back here as well, where so many of my relatives lived and grew up. Here in the United States and across Indian country, in the Native Hawaiian community, we're at a headwaters moment to keep safe very simple and core principles. And we stand, maybe for the first time, as the Native vote is recognized as significant to not only secure Indian tribes and the communities across Indian country, but the United States itself. So why should Indian country care about this? How are we here? Indian tribes, as you just heard from Chairman Bright, have always influenced the shape of the U.S. and have helped to determine its fate, from the Constitution to centuries of decisions by the Supreme Court, as well as actions of Congress and the President. Indian Affairs and the Bureau of Indian Affairs is actually one of the oldest agencies in the entire federal government. And it was first established 200 years ago in the War Department. So the BIA is actually older than the Department of the Interior, where we work. And now, of course, after all the Indian Wars, the BIA was moved to the Department of the Interior. And we know that over that time, that the BIA and the U.S. government as a whole hasn't always kept its promises. We know that history, and we feel that history across Indian country. And in fact, even after the U.S. realized and recognized the citizenship of Indian people, we still had to fight to make sure that we were able to vote. People like Marie Baldwin, Miguel Trujillo, and Peter Porter, and so many like them, worked across Indian country to secure the right for Indian people to vote. And now all of us across Indian country have their work to guide us, to bring to fruition what they fought and sacrificed to protect. And all Native people should care about that record up to today, because we see the results of our vote. Not empty promises, not empty hopes, but kept promises and confident hopes. One special result of all of us voting is the first Native woman elected as lieutenant governor of a state, and a Midwestern state at that, right next door, with Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. Another special outcome of that right to vote are the first 2 Native women elected to the United States Congress, as well as the very first Native cabinet secretary in the history of the United States, Secretary Deb Haaland. There are more than 80 Native presidential appointees in President Biden's administration, including myself. So a new bar has been set. And together we're working to fulfill the president's promises by investing $45 billion of funding across Indian country. You've all heard us say that, but it always bears repeating, because the United States has never made that type of investment in Indian country. So that alone shows that voting matters and that your vote matters. Yes, the bipartisan infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure law and Inflation Reduction Act have lifted up all of America, all across cities and rural communities and Indian country. And these laws are especially powerful to empower tribes now and in the future. President Biden built on the progress of those laws with Executive Order 14112 that reforms the way that we move these investments out to you in Indian country. The President, through that executive order, has directed us to be flexible in how we get that funding out, not just at the Department of the Interior, but across the entire federal government. And that executive order tells us to determine how much money we actually need to invest in our trust and treaty obligations, and to keep the federal government's promises to Indian people. So the Biden-Harris administration, for the first time ever in the history of the federal government, worked to secure advanced appropriations for the Indian Health Service. Our wellness and our health are prioritized for the first time which a lot of people didn't think was possible. When I worked at the department and in the administration 15 years ago, people would chuckle when the idea of advanced appropriations came up for Indian Health Service, and now that's a reality. And the Biden-Harris proposal to get mandatory advance funding, we know from just what has happened over the last 15 years, is also possible. And for us in Indian country, the results of these policies can mean life or death. It's the difference between a healthy community and an unhealthy community, a strong forest or a sick forest, or up here, fish on the table or no fish on the table. And one of the best parts of this role is getting to learn and visit all across Indian country, from tribal communities to Alaska Native villages, and to be on the ground in places like the place where I grew up. Our work produces real outcomes for Indian country with real consequences. You know, one of the frustrating things about working with the federal government, whether you're inside or outside the federal government, is that people often have a hard time connecting what the federal government does with their daily lives. It's really easy to see when things aren't going well, when things aren't working. And people can become cynical about the federal government because it's often hard to see the connection between what federal officials do in their daily lives. And that, you know, the big numbers, the $45 billion, don't have a lot of relevance to them. But we know, and I know from my experience in this administration and what we've seen in communities across Indian country, is that that work actually makes a difference in people's daily lives. So, for example, out at Hopi, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act helped fund the completion of the Hopi Arsenic Mitigation Program, or project. So out at Hopi, there's naturally occurring arsenic in the groundwater that serves as drinking water sources for people. And we know that that's not safe. And for a long time, Hopi has been working at home in its communities and also with the federal government to find other sources of clean drinking water, but didn't have the funding to complete that work. And thanks to the Biden-Harris administration working with Hopi leadership, we were able to work to get that funding to complete the Hopi Arsenic Mitigation Project so that Hopi elders can continue to pass on their way of life, Hopi children can grow up and worry or not worry about whether their drinking water is safe, and Hopi villages can continue to exist on the mesas where they've always existed. Not far away at the Cove Day School in Red Rock, Arizona, their school site was plagued with contamination from uranium mines and from radon in the soil. This is a place where kids went to school. And our administration worked with the Navajo Nation, along with the BIA and EPA worked together to invest money to tear down that school, remediate the site, and build a new school so that those kids going to school in that community can be safe. The American Rescue Plan, right when President Biden came to office, included a lot of money for a lot of different programs. At the BIA, it included $100 million for the Indian Housing Improvement Program. So those of you who aren't familiar with the budget for that program, that one-shot investment in HIP is equal to 10 years worth of funding in HIP, and it came all at once. And I know we've got a lot of tribal leaders and recovering tribal leaders in the room today with us and many watching online. You know what HIP does. That money helps the people who come to the tribal office needing their roof fixed, needing to replace windows in their house so that snow doesn't blow through the cracks in the window, or replacing the steps and maybe putting a ramp in so elders can live in the home in their community instead of having to find a different place to live. That's what that funding did. It's not just $100 million. That's better housing for people you know, maybe some of you watching. People outside of Indian country are often surprised to learn that people in Indian country live every day without things like water and electricity. We've now, over the last 2 years, under President Biden and Vice President Harris's administration, sent out $150 million to connect homes to electricity in tribal communities. And we just announced the final round of funding for that last month in September. That means people living at home have electricity to cook, to do all the things that so many other people in this country take for granted. So this work that the Biden-Harris administration has done is not esoteric. This isn't just numbers. This money goes to stuff that makes people's lives better. And we're working also to restore tribal land bases across Indian country. Under this administration, this year, we're in the process of completing 2 of the largest trust acquisitions in the BIA's history, 42,000 acres and 60,000 acres respectively in Oklahoma and New Mexico. And that's work that can continue with our new land in the trust regulations. This summer, I visited Leech Lake up in Minnesota and participated in the celebration of the return of 12,000 acres of land from the U.S. Forest Service back to the tribe to be held in trust from it was part of 25,000 acres that was illegally taken by the federal government from the tribe. It's an acknowledgement on top of the actual return of the land that we are actually doing work to right the wrongs of the past. And this isn't only a Department of the Interior action to keep U.S. promises to Indian people, but an all-of-government commitment. We are working to make sure that people outside the federal government are taking steps to right the wrongs of the past for them as well. A couple of years ago, I was up at Fond du Lac in Minnesota to celebrate the return of 18 acres of land from the city of Superior, Wisconsin. This was land that was taken in the 1900s from the tribe. It was a burial site on the shores of Lake Superior. And the land was taken, ancestors were dug up and moved to a Catholic cemetery to make way for industrial development on the waterfront. And many of those ancestors who were dug up and moved and reburied were lost because they were buried in a place with a lot of erosion. And the tribe had been working for a century to get that land back. And I was able to join the celebration with Governor Evers and Governor Walz, Governor Flanagan up at Fond du Lac to celebrate the return of that land to the tribe. And we've also been working with museums and institutions across the country under new regulations for NAGPRA to return tens of thousands of ancestors back to tribes for repatriation in their protect treaty fishing rights. Because of the right to fish in a treaty that so many tribes have reserved doesn't mean just having that right on paper and going up to fish in an empty river. It means actually making sure that fish can thrive in that river so people can continue their way of life and exercise their treaty rights. And that work also means that we're investing in restoring ecosystems so that those fish will always be there. So we're seeing land return, we're seeing water return, we're seeing ancestors return, we're seeing fish return. We're seeing co-management of other U.S. lands and waters, and we're seeing investment in species protections for all of our relatives, from salmon to bison. And we see federal agencies taking steps to repair the mistakes that they made, to restore what they took from Indian people, and begin to make good on the promises that the federal government made. So this is a political and legal relationship between the United States and Indian country. And I want to make sure that it keeps getting stronger and that it doesn't get weakened. I don't want these last 4 years, to just be a moment that we look back on and see this time as a lucky strike when we had a few good years. This should be the starting point for something better. And we shouldn't settle for anything less. So from the Arctic all the way to the bottom of the Grand Canyon and all those places in between, we have to follow the path that's been laid for us for Indian country so that we are not forgotten again in these political systems. And I know it's really easy to look at the news every day and to be cynical about that. But it's also easy when you look really hard to see that good things are possible. Healing is possible. Restoring is possible. This administration's work, our work, and everybody's work, all of our work together, is making people's lives better. We haven't fixed every problem that was created over the last 250 years, and we know that there's a lot more work to do. But our work still, in 4 years, has made people's lives better. So on behalf of all of us at the Department of the Interior and across the Biden-Harris administration, I want to say miigwech, thank you for believing in us, for praying for us, for supporting us in our work. It's one that over time, I believe, will be remembered as a good moment and a good period for federal and tribal relationships. And all of us who serve in government, some of you watching maybe have served in government before, know how important it is to have those partnerships and those prayers and that support. Because this work isn't done alone, it's done in partnership. And we shouldn't accept anything less. Miigwech, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you so much for working to make sure Indian people are heard and seen and vote. Thank you.
Kamadat venti venye pramul Licio Ortega, mapipanya new minyas habs gaman squatan, and nipshamul nahar. Greetings, relatives. I'm Licio Ortega. I'm a citizen of the Fort Yuma Quechan Indian Tribe, and I'm the vice president at Thunderbird Strategic. OJ went to go have a smoke, so I am supposed to bring up Del. Del, if you are ready for your presentation, we're ready for you.
Such a dramatic entrance over there on the side. Good morning, everyone, and to all the folks online as well. But before I begin the PowerPoint presentation here that I think she's going to pull up, Biabsaloke, Newabeyichish, Iokodesh, Balakbaga, Tichia, Hina, Ek, Aleishja, Ewishchik, B, Hukalashja, Hina, Bapwabasa, Bagondilish. So I just said in the Crow language, good morning, it's a good day. Thank you to all the people, the relatives that are out there, the hosts that are here that provided this forum for everyone who worked behind the scenes to put it together, for the veterans and for those who serve in government and all governments, including tribal nations. I'm the Taizabundle clan. My mother is Patricia Whiteman, still alive, going to be 84 here pretty soon, elder over at Crow Country, and has always been a guiding force for me. And English is her second language as well. And so I was given two spiritual names, first Stone by my uncle Chanis Whiteman, and then He Who Rises Above and Walks Along. That was given to me by Jerome Huggs, another uncle, before I served in the Obama administration with a couple of people who are here. They made sure I had a spiritual name to protect me, and I'd like to think it happened for the most part, but then they kept giving me more and more work, and it led to a lot of conflicts, and but the service, hopefully we had set the foundation for a lot of things that are happening now. I think a lot of the things that the Assistant Secretary just said was very aspirational at that time, and I know the PDAS is here as well, and we remember having those conversations around what was possible or not, and at least setting the foundation for those that come after. I'm here to talk about taxes. I know all of your favorite subject. Hopefully you don't fall asleep. There's some pictures in there to keep everyone awake. But what I want to do is, I'm having a hard time seeing the screen from here. But what I want to do is tell you a story about this, and there's going to be a lot of pictures around Treasury, because that was another aspirational thing some 15, 12 years ago, was we wished we had natives in Treasury so that they could do the good work that they've done. Thank you. So, U.S. taxation of indigenous people. When I was, this is a journey that began for me 25 years ago, and actually for Indian country was 250 years ago. I remember we had a case over in Crow Country on, at the time, mining of coal, which is largely ceased now because of a variety of things that have happened in the economic markets, the world, and going towards renewable energy. But at that time, it was almost all of our non-federal revenue. And so there was the mining of it was a small mine in the larger picture of things, but it was very significant because it had almost all of the private jobs that were there. And the state of Montana assessed 30% severance tax on all that was mined out of the ground. And I remember being in law school and reading this case, and it just pissed me off. I could not believe the state of Montana was taking 30% off the top. And I thought, how did this happen? Why does the state of Montana, and it was litigated, it was back and forth, and ultimately the Crow Nation prevailed on the case, but there was a previous case for oil and gas down in the Southwest, and they allowed the state to do severance taxes there as well. So it ended up being between 30 to 8%. So a lot of states would take 15% off the top because they thought that was really safe, according to US Supreme Court precedent. So there began my journey. I was very angry and upset that I couldn't understand how the state of Montana could take that much from Indian country that was pretty much most of our wealth. So eventually I went back to get an LLM, and I spent 2 years researching the origins of taxation of indigenous people. There was one book on this subject matter, and the title is there, The Story of Taxing Those They Found Here, in I think it was 1974. And in that book, it details how the origin of a lot of these taxes came to be. And what I want to do is share with you what I found in just 15 slides to give you the story of how all this happened. And I think you might feel the same way I do about what happened to us, that happened to all of Indian country. And it's the intersection of multiple areas of law. So it gets a bit complicated, but you have federal Indian law, some would call it colonial law. You have constitutional law, tax law, and then you have all of these cases that are littered through it dealing with citizenship. Are Indians citizens? And what happens when they become citizens? And I'm going to share with you what I found over those multiple years and the time since then, in the 2 centuries, what is called Indian tax law, right? I say has been an efficient mechanism that invariably creates changes to the legal and political status of tribal nations and their citizens in order for other governments and their citizens to unjustly capture wealth derived from land, resources, and taxable activities in Indian country. And let me show you how this begins. What do I need to do to go to the next? The right arrow. I'm hitting the right arrow. I left my glasses at the table, so I'm just seeing a bunch of blurry images. And for those of you aging, you know, that's part of what we have to accept is, where's my reading glasses? I can't see anything. Which one did you hit?
Just this one. It was clicked off.
Okay, so look at the lovely pictures. We got Treasurer Malerba. She's going to be littered throughout this, and we'll get to the very end where I see some. I'm going to lead you through this where it gets really depressing for a while, and then hopefully you see that there is hope on the horizon. I pulled some of these quotes out of early US constitutional law. That's a class I taught a number of years ago. And this one in particular really struck me in the Federalist Papers number 12. A nation cannot long exist without revenue. Destitute of this essential support, it must resign its independence. So those were the founders of the United States when they were trying to rationalize having the US Constitution. They said in there an acknowledgement, if you don't have revenue, how are you gonna have independence? You see this wonderful facility with revenue, they're getting to assert their sovereignty, right, to the outside world after they've received the revenue. And then a second one, an early case in constitutional law was McCulloch versus Maryland, and it had to deal with, can a state tax a federal bank? And in there, they said, the US Supreme Court, the power to tax is the power to destroy. So if you're taking the revenue from one government, placing it with another, then they're going to use that revenue however they deem fit. And it's usually in tax policy debates. And then I like this quote from John Rawls for all of you philosophers out there, Theory of Justice. Laws and institutions, no matter how efficient and well arranged, must be reformed or abolished if they are unjust. Well, I think Indian tax law has to be reformed, right? I mean, as you'll see. So in the Declaration of Independence, I'm quoting from the Declaration. You can Google it, look online. And I've selectively just grabbed a couple here that I think are relevant. First one is, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That's a really important principle, right? American Republican democracy is based on you elect people, they make decisions, and then the citizens are informed, and then you decide whether you're going to keep those people in office or not, right? We're very close to another election that could have very drastic consequences on all of the really amazing work that this administration has done. Hopefully it continues. And then another piece, in their citing, and again, this is a Declaration of Independence, right? So this is what they're saying as the colonies to England, that they list a laundry list of injuries and injustices to declare that they should be independent of the mother country. And they said one of them was for imposing taxes on us without our consent. And then they also go on to say at the very end, and they're exciting domestic insurrections by merciless Indian savages. And I remember Billy Frank told me when I was there, he said, Del, they came to us. They came to us. So how are we the savages? The late Billy Frank said that to me, and it just made me pause and think, yeah, they're the ones who came to us, right? So why are we the merciless savages? Isn't it warriors who are defending their homeland, as we have with the veterans here? But that was one of the reasons to start the Revolutionary War, right? And then in the Constitution itself, there's only 2 provisions that mention tribes or Indians. And in Section 2 of Article 1, representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states, excluding Indians not taxed, and 3/5 of all other persons. We know what the 3/5 is, dealing with slavery, right? But it says excluding Indians not taxed. That's in the Constitution. Shouldn't that have meaning? Doesn't that mean that if the Indians are saying we don't submit to your tax system? That's what the Constitution directly acknowledges. And then in Section 8, Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with the Indian tribes. I repeat, with, not for, with the Indian tribes. And they have with foreign nations, right? It's the equivalent. That's the understanding that was there. And then also the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, just for all of your purposes, 13, 14, and 15 happened after the Civil War. 13 was abolishing slavery. 14th got rid of 3/5 to include them as citizens, full citizens. But interestingly enough, at that time, they could have just deleted the provision that I cited in the first part, but instead they retained it. So the 14th Amendment still says excluding Indians not taxed. It remained. And then eventually in 1913, I believe, is the 16th Amendment to the Constitution, which allows the federal income tax, which is a watershed moment in the history of the country because, and I'll share with you some slides on how that ended up playing out and how important it was. Because the federal government didn't have a direct income tax before 1913. It was all transactional, excise taxes, tariffs, that type of thing. We all know now, like you see on your pay stubs, or if you're a contractor, 30, 40% off the top, right? That's what the 16th Amendment allowed. So in my kind of reading of all of this history, several levels of government exist today that provide services to meet public needs, right? We have cities, counties, townships, charters, state government, federal government, tribal government, all these levels of government, right? And here, I assume there's governments based on providing wastewater or water. There's oftentimes for deciding on broadband or electricity, you have public service commissions. You've got various levels of government. And for the most part, each of them independently assess, enforce, and collect taxes to do what they are created to do. And so these government tax collections throughout history have risen higher and higher and enhanced the presence and power of governments, national, state, local. And so there was a very influential article back in 1964 called The New Property in the Yale Law Journal. And in that, this professor said, the wealth of many Americans depends on a relationship to government. The newly created forms of wealth, you have money, benefits, services, contract, franchises, licenses, reduce individual autonomy in favor of governments as a primary provider of services. So all these forms of wealth are called taxes, right? And they assess and get it, collect, and then have debates about how that money is going to be used. It could be for, say, a baseball stadium down the road. It could be for a basketball stadium down that way, due north. It could be a school, if you're in the state and local realm. It could be all of these buildings that are here, they might actually give a tax credit for them to clean up, which is what they did over 30 years in Milwaukee for brownfield redevelopment. That's how you have the historic Third Ward. They utilized a break from taxes to get people to invest to recreate that area so that it's this thriving area that you see today. And here's the net effect. Look at this chart. Federal government in 1800, $10 million in taxes collected. There's no accounting for what the states, the colonies were doing at the time. And you look at 1900, look how far it had risen. $500 million. 1950, $37 billion. 2000, $2 trillion. And you see the states, look at the rise in revenue that they collected. 156 million in 1900, 8 billion in 1950, and now $500 billion are how much states, and this is 24 years old, right? So the number has probably increased. And then local, the counties, the townships, et cetera, they're even at 270 billion. This is out of a casebook, by the way, called State and Local Taxation by the Hellerstein. He's a very renowned professor in the state and local tax area. But I remember reading this when I was teaching about taxes. This just shocked me, this chart. Where are tribes? Where are tribal governments? Well, they're subsumed in this. Everyone else is collecting their wealth. Tribes are not collecting it. Well, you have like say a resort fee or something off of people who stay here. There are these other types of taxes. Navajo Nation has a full code. They try to collect it off utilities, the hotels, et cetera. But by and large, let's flip now to the indigenous context. We know all these federal Indian policies. We got a lot of tribal leaders here from colonial, Confederation, and then the Trade and Intercourse Act. In the first US Congress in 1790, I think there were, maybe 15 or 20 public laws, and 6 or 7 of them are native. The first 1/3 of all the activities of Congress was native-led because they wanted to control the trade, right, of Indians. That's why we had those licensed Indian traders. Tribal governments didn't get to pick their own legal counsel until, 2000? It was picked it had to be approved by the Department of Interior. So obviously all of this was a very concerning of the founders. You have the reservation era, allotment assimilation. I mean, these are all titles, but as the Assistant Secretary said earlier, real impacts on each of these communities and what happened. You can drill down and look at the specific legal history of each tribe, and you're gonna see all of these play out time and again. I did that up in Crow Country and for Blackfeet. And in Crow, we have all of these specific acts that affected the community there, from granting railroad right-of-ways for next to nothing, to the land cessions, to the allotment, to the tax foreclosures of individual Indians, which happened quite a bit during the earlier periods. And then what we end up with in what we were born into was this jurisdiction and modern problems. Endless fights and litigation, right, by the people who were before us. And you see that picture on the right, Indian land for sale, and then they have this saying, find lands in the West. I don't know how many watched Horizon, the Kevin Costner one after his follow-up to Dances with Wolves, and I think it's a pretty accurate portrayal of how the West, was settled and what happened. And you see this picture. Sometimes it's helpful just to see what happened. So you have 1850, and look at 1865 at the end of the Civil War. There was still a lot of Indian land. Then you go all the way to 1880. Look how much land was lost in that 30-year period. I should say taken. It was just taken by the United States. And the interesting part is, just to share with you, I went up to the Gettysburg, and when you're in these, positions, you get to have like private tours by, say, the Park Service, some expert historian. And I asked this historian, I said, what happened at the end of the Civil War? I've always been curious. And apparently the soldiers had been promised that they would get to go home once it was done. And instead, they were dispatched to the West to help settle the West. So that's where all the Indian wars, there's plenty of Lakotas who know all of that, and they fought valiantly. A lot of leaders they cite to this day, Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, and leaders all throughout the West were trying to fight. You have Geronimo, down in Apache country. And ultimately, the US decided, and this is also in a Law Review article, that it cost the US $1 million for every dead Indian. So they said, we probably should just sit down and negotiate with them because this is too expensive. And that's where you get these, oh, hey, we're gonna, absolute and undisturbed use forever. 5 years later, just kidding, we need this part of your reservation, we need that part of your, we need these minerals. We discovered gold, so we're gonna take this mountain. And that's what started removal to begin with, right? Gold was found in Georgia. New York had the first removal. A lot of folks have connections to New York from here, a number of tribes in the Midwest, because they were removed from New York and down. And you see 1990, you've heard the efforts at restoring homelands and how important that is and how meaningful. And hopefully that is just a national policy that keeps going forward. So there's a whole line of cases, I won't go into this in detail, but basically all these cases said, yes, they're separate and independent, they're sovereign, let them be. And then you see these tax cases as late as 1866 called the Kansas Indians and New York Indians, 2 US Supreme Court cases, where they said no taxes are allowed in Indian territory. And then finally Elk versus Wilkins for all you citizenship and right native vote. That case held Indians are not automatically US citizens. And they cited Indians not taxed in the 14th Amendment. So you had to petition to become a competent Indian, right, to become a US citizen in a federal court for the longest time until 1924. So US treaty making ends in 1871 because the House of Representatives and the Senate were fighting each other. And they said, well, let's just end treaty making. And this historic case that really isn't taught in a lot of law schools that I found in the research is Cherokee tobacco. So Cherokees in the United States in 1866 signed a treaty saying, okay, if we leave our territory when we produce tobacco, once it goes out, we'll allow a tax on that. Then the US passes an internal revenue law in 1868. Remember, there wasn't a direct income tax, right, until 1913. They pass a revenue law saying tobacco and alcohol within Indian territory are gonna have to pay a tax. So it comes up before the Supreme Court. And interestingly enough, there wasn't even an internal revenue district that included Cherokee territory. They didn't even have a district yet. We think of the IRS now, there was no IRS at the time. And then, so in that case, the US Supreme Court says, upheld, taxes inside Indian country. All the internal revenue laws apply inside. So they had to ignore the treaty, which said only on the outside. There wasn't even a revenue district. There's no mention of Indians or tribes in that 1868 law. So they just made it up. Literally just made it up. And Justice Pound, I can't remember, he's on the Second Circuit, I believe, he said he saw this and did research, and he wrote an article in the 1920s, and he said, Indians are nationals and they're without a nation. Because, in effect, taxation without representation. Do you remember how we started? Do you remember the Declaration of Independence? Wasn't one of the reasons taxation without representation? Well, that's where Indians were, like throughout. And so the new tax rule after these other cases, after the direct income tax, the 31 case and the 35 case, they said, okay, basically federal taxes apply to Indians unless they can point to an exclusion or exemption in federal law. So do you see how that's flipped the presumption that Indians have got to find this or go get something enacted in Congress to be excluded from federal income taxes? Despite, and this is the precedent, Cherokee tobacco. That is all the later decisions cite Cherokee tobacco. So that's the origin of federal taxes in Indian country, which was made up. So fast forward after this period, tribal governments are mired in litigation. I mean, how many tribal leaders here have had some tax case that's come up while they've been serving? Can you raise your hand? All of them, right? Everyone's mired in some kind of local litigation over taxes. And so there's potentially 4 overlapping taxes in Indian country. And yet, what do we hear online when people say, when they, like you see the comment section in any articles, they always say Indians don't pay taxes. They don't pay their fair share. Well, I've just shared with you that they made it up that that was the case. And they weren't even citizens yet. I think they paid their fair share. You saw all the land, right? Isn't that a prepaid tax? So the Indian problem, no, these guys have special rights and these old treaties and they need to pay their fair share and become citizens. That's the kind of language you hear. And it's littered throughout all these decisions, all over. So the right to vote and citizenship are all tied into it. And now let's go to the modern cases. This is where everyone goes because this is where state and local taxes are. You have a so-called infringement test. The Warren Trading Coast is a federal preemption. If the feds preempt the area, then the local tax won't apply. Well, how many times have the feds preempted anything? Well, we'll get to that at the last slide. And then the Bracker case, which is the one cited by all the current cases, and they say, we're gonna balance all of their interests. The federal interest, the state interest, the tribal interest, the county interest, and if it looks like it should favor another government, then that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna balance it. And you see it with cigarettes, with the motor fuels, with the extraction, and then you have all these modern cases which flipped everything on its head saying, oh, all the state and local regulations apply, including taxes, unless they can meet some exception. Did you see how in the federal context, they flipped it and said taxes apply unless they can show? Well, that happened in the state context and local context as well. So now it's all complete, right? And then Yakima, Leech Lake, City of Sherrill, so the city gets to assess a tax as well. Leech Lake was the county gets to assess a tax. Even when the tribe owns it in fee simple, they said the county gets to assess it. And Yakima was another, only if the reservation is closed is it subject to tribal control. If it's open, then these taxes apply. Well, who opened it up? I mean, you saw what happened. It's just it's a nonsensical test. And David Getches wrote about this, the late professor at Colorado. Basically, state government and local interests prevail on all these cases in Indian country. Minority rights are not protected, and they view tribes as just another minority. They forget what the assistant secretary said. It's a legal and political relationship. It's not racial. We have citizens and governments, and they've got to provide services. And then in all of these cases, he said over the 40 years, mainstream values are protected. Well, whose mainstream values? Indians? No, their neighbors. Their values are protected. So after all these multiple years, here's what I concluded. Since the founding of the Republic, every generation of Americans and their elected officials, local and national, has debated who controls some form of wealth in Indian country, actual or potential. The removal, allotment, land cessions, assimilation, termination, right? All of those dealt with extracting some form of wealth from Indian country. And then this quote by I guess our predecessors in 1876, this is the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, right? He quoted in his report to Congress, "Whenever an Indian reservation has on it good land or timber or minerals, the cupidity of the white man is excited, and a constant struggle is inaugurated to dispossess the Indian, in which the avarice and determination of the white man usually prevails." Didn't that chart and the land picture show you that that's true? And this is the Commissioner of Indian Affairs who's supposed to protect Indian country, right? He's the one who wrote this. This is his quote, you know. So I say, therefore, tribes cannot achieve meaningful self-determination because they're not the primary taxing government, and they're precluded from collecting public revenue to provide the basic services that we all know they need. If everyone else is taxing the wealth, where are the tribes in that equation? So returning to original principles, Indians not taxed, that has to mean something, right? It's in the Constitution, it was preserved in the 14th Amendment, and also there's a line of cases that say, tribes, you can tax, but if you've already got 4 sets of taxes, do you think the tribes are gonna tax on top of that? Then you're never gonna get development. No, they're gonna go to right off the reservation. How many people have seen all the development around the reservation, but never inside? Because of this, right? Because of this whole history. And I won't go in, but the tribes have the right to tax, they just oftentimes don't exercise it. And so, just finishing up here, I say reestablishing tribal control over wealth in Indian country in lieu of federal, state, and other local governments is fundamental to and reflects upon the basic integrity of American Republican democracy. Tribes should control their own wealth, period, right? And use it how they deem fit. Well, some 15 to 12 years ago, we have this thing called the Hearth Act, and we have the person who shepherded it, who's Assistant Secretary now, and I tried to get that vision of what I know into the federal regulation. You remember how I said if there's federal preemption, that you can preclude state and local taxes? So that's what we tried, and this is the provision in the Hearth Act, subject only to applicable federal law, which I disagreed with, by the way, that first part. I won't go into the details of that, but permanent improvements on the leased land without regard to ownership of these improvements are not subject to any fee, tax, assessment, levy, or other charge by any state or political subdivision of a state. But if the tribe so chooses, they can extract wealth from their leasing, but no other government should be allowed to tax that wealth. So this is kind of a foundational piece that we try to put in the federal regulations, right? And it was challenged. There was a bunch of court cases that I won't go into, but I think it was upheld in the Seminole and 11th Circuit case. And then now the more recent stuff, which I'm gonna ask to, should I give this back to you to pull up the fact sheets? So we planted a flag to say no more, stop all the people taking the wealth out of Indian country. And Harvard has a policy piece on this that just came out last week. But in the last 3 weeks, there are 2 proposed rules by Treasury. I don't know if Chief Malerba is around here. Her and her staff have done an amazing job. We submitted, I think, 119 pages of comments. And all of the stuff I told you, I put into a written document and submitted to Treasury saying, this is the real law. This is, you know, this needs reform, what I had said earlier. Do you want to just stay up here for a second? Maybe I'll. So the reason this presentation is here by OJ and others who asked me to do this is that we have 2 proposed rules which would follow up on what we did with the Hearth Act regulations and preclude others from extracting these forms of wealth in Indian country. But they're proposed rules. So we need positive comments from Indian country, all of you out there who can provide comments, say this is a really good thing, we support this, we don't want any changes to it. All of that needs to happen in order for it to become a final rule. And once it becomes a final rule, then that's the federal law in these tax matters. And we've never had a regulation like this before, either of them. And the first one is the general welfare exclusion. 2014, Congress passed. There was a lot of Indian country rose up. This was passed to say, when a tribe decides to provide certain benefits that are, it says general welfare, that could be, say, powwow prizes, which is happening now. It could be elder benefits. It could be name the benefit that you want to give children for education, for all sorts of things. That those, in fact, should not be taxable. And if the tribe so chooses to make whatever benefit they want, that shouldn't be, none of that should be taken by the IRS. That's basically what this says, without going into the details. So we need the support of Indian country. We need the tribal leaders to tell people, support, support, support this rule. And I think it's consistent with what I said. Tribes should get to decide, control their wealth, and decide what they're going to do with it. That's why you're elected, right? So you should be the ones to control it because you're the ones who are accountable, not other people. And then even when they do tax the other governments, do they ever provide the services back when they extract that wealth? My experience in 25 years is they usually do not. And then another rule, which I'll just tie up here, is the non-taxability of tribal entities. And we're going to post some stuff on the CULT website so you have all of these links to it all. This one, to me, was very, very important because Treasury just decided that if a tribe starts any entity, corporation, LLC, partnership, whatever entity it is, as a matter of tribal law, that whatever it does on or off reservation is not subject to federal income tax. Can you imagine how much wealth you're going to start saving by not having 40% go off the top? That it stays inside, on or off the reservation, I repeat. How important that is, because you got to engage off reservation, right, to have the opportunities. And subsidiaries, including subsidiaries. So you don't have to do the Section 17 corporations by DOI to create something. You can just create it as a matter of tribal law and say, we want renewable energy. Here's an entity. You're not subject to tax, whatever you do. You can go in the market and try to produce electricity, whatever it is. This is going to unlock access to capital, which hasn't happened as much as we'd like. You always get these risk assessments on who invests, and they say, what's my rate of return, right? You hear the investors say that. Well, if you have entities that are not subject to tax and you create them for their purpose, then they're more likely to invest because you've saved all those taxes that would have been going out, right? So now they're going to want to invest more because then you can give the rate of return. So I'll just end with where I started, the journey from 25 years ago. Indians not taxed. That was the original understanding. These rules are the first step towards laying a new foundation. And we keep advancing from there, right? But you got to start somewhere. And so I'm hopeful if we can get these rules finalized that we start gathering more and more wealth in Indian country and that those are not being taken out and used by other governments, that they stay inside and Indian country gets to use the wealth that they generate for their purposes and how they decide. And that, to me, is Indians not taxed. So with that, I want to thank you all for listening to me and appreciate being up here. Did OJ sneak off for another smoke? Is that where? Is it time for a break? Yeah, 15-minute break, and we'll come back.
poking it, or do I
It's in
point
the
it?
general direction.
Into what, that thing?
Over here.
Over there.
No, over the screen, basically.
Okay,
But I'm going to load your slideshow right now and we can test them out.
okay, so
So,
this is,
I'm
just so,
actually not sure. I've not used this one. So,
okay, load it up and let's play with
Yeah,
it.
you got it. I think it's just the arrows on the side.
I'm gonna kill myself.
There's stairs on this side.
Oh, hold on. I pressed the wrong button. Here,
Oh, no,
turn-
you're good. No, I think I actually,
I
let me
turned
see
it
this.
off.
I'll get this on. And I don't know